Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly. I am a current consultant for Accepted, and I'm excited to be here with you today. As a former Dean of Admissions for Carnegie Mellon, Tepper, and Georgetown McDonough, I have some great information to share with you about the recommendation process. I know many of you may be well into your applications for round one. For those of you who are looking ahead, either one, I think there's some good information here, and I'm happy to be able to share it with you. As I mentioned, I have been in the admissions world for over 25 years. 23 of them was working as admissions dean at schools, including Tepper and Georgetown, as well as the University of Pittsburgh. It's crazy when I think about the fact that I've reviewed, along with my team, have reviewed over 38,000 applications. And so the information that I'm going to share with you is information that, insights that I've gained from that work. So when we think of the letter of recommendation, there are 4 questions on the slide, and I just kind of want to walk through those. The first one is to talk briefly about why is the recommendation used. It is a piece of the application that gives us a third party perspective about your candidacy. And when I say gives us, I mean the admissions committee. It provides insights into your work, how you have achieved at your, through your professional life, how you have grown, and really is an opportunity for the admissions committee to hear from someone that's really a third party and has a perspective that the committee does not have throughout the rest of your application. There also is an important thing for you all to make sure that you have lined up is how many recommendations are required for a given school. A lot of times you'll see one recommendation. There's a point at which schools were trying to reduce the kind of the hurdle for applicants, and they found that the recommendation could be adjusted down to 1 and they would still get the kind of information they were looking for. There are some schools that are looking for 2, and you want to make sure that you understand how many are required for the given school. If you're applying to maybe some business master's programs, that number could even be a little bit different. But for MBA programs, which is primarily our conversation today, you're going to find 1 or 2 at the most. The other piece of information is when is the recommendation due? And you might first think, well, isn't it due by the deadline? And while I think that's a great perspective to have, there's a nuance with the process that I want to explain to you. And this is for kind of your stress level as you're working through this process. So when you go to fill out the application, most often you will fill in the recommendation information. And when you hit save on that page, an email will go to your recommender, letting them know that you are asking them to be one of the recommenders, and they'll provide a link and they'll provide a little bit of instruction about what they need to do on the site. So I tell you that because there's some planning and preparation that you need to do before you put that information in there. So you want to make sure that you've had a conversation with the person that you're going to include, rather than putting it in there and knowing that you're going to talk to them next week. So when you put the information in there and hit save, most likely they will automatically get an email about the recommendation process. Now, when you're working on your application and when you complete all of the application, as long as you have done what I just described for the recommendation, you'll be able to submit your application. So, in fact, the recommendation part coming from the recommender isn't required in order to submit your application. Um, However, your application will not move forward in the process to being read and evaluated until your recommender submits their recommendation. So relieving a little bit of stress that you don't have to, if it's coming up to the deadline and they haven't submitted yet, um, just to give yourself a little bit of breathing room, know that it's not required. I would say we'll talk about planning, and I would say you wanna work toward the goal of that having been submitted before the deadline so that you don't have to worry about it, but we'll get to those details in just a bit. Also, I wanted to mention, if you have any comments or questions, please put them in the chat box. I'd be happy to entertain those, as we go along, and I can work them into the conversation, as well. Um, Let me go on to the next section, which is, well, who do I ask? And generally, you want to ask someone who can make an observation of you in the workplace, who can speak to your achievements and different characteristics about you. Um, we'll, the very next slide, we're going to take a little bit deeper dive into the who. So, why don't we go ahead and do that? The best choice for your professional recommendation, which is what B schools want, are professional relationships. So a professional relationship, the best choice is your current supervisor. Now, you may be sitting there thinking, well, you know what? I don't really want to tell my current supervisor that I might be leaving because of X, Y, or Z. Maybe bonuses are coming up. Maybe, you just don't want them to know you're applying in case you end up not going this year. And so sometimes you can't tell your current supervisor. In that case, the other options are a previous supervisor or maybe even an indirect supervisor. So someone who knows your work, um, but may not, report to you, or you may not report to them from an HR standpoint. So I'm thinking about one of my first jobs out of college. I worked for a company that had a matrix organization, and I had client leaders who I reported to for the work that was being done for the client. Although my director was my HR boss, so I could have had one of those client leaders complete the recommendation for me. You also could consider a mentor. Um, and especially if you're in an entrepreneurial position, a mentor could work, or a client, maybe even a vendor. So again, these are perspectives of you, and that relationship is important. A couple of questions as I was talking this week with a client, we were talking about who a recommender could be, and the question came up, could they be my mentee? Because if the committee is looking for kind of a insight into my leadership ability, wouldn't a person that I'm mentoring be a good person to provide that information? And my answer was honestly no. That's not the perspective that the admissions committee is looking for. They're not looking for a peer. They're not looking for someone you supervise or you mentor. You want it to think about it from a standpoint of who you report up to, who is more senior to you that can provide that information for you. And then the last thing I want to say is, kind of a myth buster. The title is not important. If the CEO is willing to write a recommendation for you, yet they aren't able to provide details about projects you've worked on, um, details about when you've succeeded or when you've been challenged, that's not going to be what the admissions committee looks for. I'll tell you, one time when I was working at Georgetown, I was reading an application, and I love politics, so just kind of put that out there. I was reading an application and I saw that Bill Clinton submitted a recommendation for someone, and I thought, oh, how cool! I can't wait to read this. When I went to read it and began reading, I was disappointed right away because it was a formality for this letter to be written, and probably was I'm not even sure that it was his original signature, probably a stamp of some kind, but there was no real meaningful information in there about this candidate. So an impressive title is not important. I would rather see your current supervisor, and the admissions committee would rather see your current supervisor, or some of the other options that we mentioned here. So there's a lot going on this slide, and I wanted to put it all on one slide because as you're thinking about preparation, there's some important things to consider. When you decide or have a list of people that you may want to ask to be your recommender, you're gonna want to talk with them, maybe invite them for a cup of coffee so that you can talk to them about this opportunity for that you're applying to B school, and that you'd like for them to be a recommender. If they seem hesitant, maybe they're in a busy season, or excuse me, maybe there's just some hesitation. Maybe they don't see your relationship the same way you do. Who knows? If there's a hesitation, just give them an out. If it's not something they think they can do, then by all means, you don't want to push them or pressure them to do something, and they're not able to really put their full effort into it. Um, Once you have identified, spoken with, and have agreement who your recommender will be, you want to set up a prep meeting where you can talk with them about your candidacy. You'll want to provide to them your resume, your motivation for business school, career goals, and bulleted examples of what they might be able to use as they're thinking about the questions that they'll need to respond to. So this is not you writing the recommendation for them. This is you recalling situations based on the prompts in the recommendation form that will allow you to provide details about a situation that you remember in case the recommender doesn't necessarily recall the details. So instead of handing them a blank sheet of paper, you can provide them with a set of documents that will help them to more easily provide um, information about your candidacy for the purpose of the recommendation letter. You want to think about, for the examples, when you've achieved a high level of performance, um, when you have demonstrated growth, and that can come in the format of constructive feedback. That's one of the sections of the common letter of recommendation, which we'll talk about in a minute. But think about, it doesn't all have to be when you succeeded initially. I think a lot of times, um, providing a story of when, initially maybe you didn't really know how to do something and you got coaching and then you did it really well. That's often a great insight for the admissions committee. You also want to discuss the timeline with your recommender. Make sure that they have the runway to provide the kind of information you're looking for. It is not going to take them hours and hours and hours to do, but remember, they're busy people. They're juggling professional and personal lives, and my suggestion is to give them a 4 to 6 week uh, kind of timeline or runway, if you will, to complete the recommendation. So as you're talking with them, agree on the timeline. If possible, set their deadline, maybe even a week before the application deadline. That way you're not chasing them down at the last minute. But I think importantly, agree that you're going to touch base in 2 weeks to see if they need anything or if they have any questions. And then agree that 2 weeks before the deadline, their deadline of submitting the recommendation, you'll reach out just to check in and remind them that the deadline is coming up. So by agreeing to that up front, you're then not feeling like, oh, I'm bothering them and I don't want to annoy them. And this just allows you to clear the decks and have that conversation um, right up front, so that it's expected that you're going to reach out. So I want to talk about the common letter of recommendation. So this is the result of a group of leading business schools working with the Graduate Management Admission Council on developing a common letter of recommendation. It was based largely on Stanford's recommendation at the time. I was fortunate to be on that task force working to create the common letter of recommendation. So um, it's great to be able to, many years later, to be able to talk to you about that process and just help you to understand a little bit more about what will go into it. Here we've got three main sections of the recommendation. Um, the first section you'll see is going to be recommender information, the company, the title of the person, the relationship to you, and a work email. We'll come back to it. Don't worry, that's a point I really want to make sure that we make. Also, in the leadership assessment, there are skills that they'll assess about you. And then they'll create or provide a rating compared to peers in the same type of role, and then they'll make their overall recommendation. And then the final part is a set of open-ended questions. That will the first one we'll go over these, but the first one is much shorter than the last two, and we can walk through those here in a couple slides. Okay, so this comes actually from the form. If you want to get a copy of the form, you can just Google GMAC Common Letter of Recommendation, and you'll be able to find online the template that you're welcome to use. You may even want to provide a copy of the template to your recommender. The great thing about the common letter of recommendation, if you're applying to 5 schools and each of the schools uses this format, then your recommender only has to write the information once, and then their job after that for the subsequent schools, um, after initially writing it for the first application you're applying to, their job is copying and pasting the information into the system of the next school. So this is a great kind of placeholder, if you will, if you want to give them a copy of this PDF that you can find online. So when you take a look at the initial part of the application or of the recommendation, you're going to find this section. And you can see here that this is interesting, and I want to point this out to you. You'll see some schools will require a work email. The way that this is set up is that it says to the recommender, if you're using your personal email account for this recommendation, please enter your work email address, which may be used as a verification of your identity if the applicant is admitted. So, wow, what does that mean? Once you're admitted to a program, most top business schools are using a third-party vendor to verify information in your application. This will be a data point that they verify. And so it's important that that you provide, if they're not using in the very initial part, if they're not using their work email, that they provide that information here, so the admissions committee can do its job. You'll see here the context of the relationship, which means we work at the same company, I'm a vendor, I'm a client. And then if you need to explain, or if they need to explain, there's a box for that. And then the nature of your relationship is where it says direct supervisor, indirect supervisor, and that's where they select that information. They also are asking how long you've known the applicant, and you know, they're trying to just identify the time frame, and so you can include that in there as well. The next section that I want to talk about is the section, you'll recall that I mentioned there are 12 skills or characteristics that the recommender needs to respond to. And so for each of the skills or characteristics, there is a set of potential descriptions, or there are a set of descriptions that will align with their observation of you. So here's an example for team leadership. And it says manages and empowers a team of direct reports or peers on project-based teams, including virtual teams. So the selection, or the options they can select from, go from, you know what, I don't have a basis for judgment. This is just not an area that you know, I have worked on, or I have observed. So I need for this one to put no basis of judgment. And then what you'll see is for each of the subsequent descriptions, the strength, the competency is greater as each one is defined. And so, you know, someone who has a very strong team leadership skills may, you know, have one of the bottom two. The one says actively engages the team, or recruits others into duties, and you can read the rest of that information. But they will have, for each of the 12 questions, this kind of setup to respond to. At the end of that section, there are two questions. One is, based on your professional experience, rate this applicant compared to his or her peers in the same role. And so clearly you are hoping that, you know, they'll say best encountered in my career, outstanding, excellent, top 10%, still, you know, on the stronger side. Hopefully you're not going to have anyone rate you below average, or you know, you want to make sure that you're identifying someone that is able to assess your professional experience compared to others in your group, or in that same type of role or group. And then overall, the question asks or prompts the responder to say, they could say, I do not recommend this applicant, to I enthusiastically recommend this applicant. Again, we're all going to hope for the enthusiastically recommend. Um, if you get a sense as you're talking with your potential recommender, a couple slides earlier we talked about that, if you just get a sense of hesitation, my advice is to give them that out, because clearly something's going on and they don't feel like they're going to be able to provide you the type of information that you ultimately need for this process. And then the last section that you'll complete, or they'll complete, I'm sorry, the last section of the common letter recommendation are the three questions that are the substance of what the work that the recommender will need to put in terms of writing. And these are the questions for which you're going to create the bulleted list of here are some examples. And when you provide that bulleted list, and you're providing examples, make sure that you're providing a little bit of information about the context of the situation. You also want to make sure that you're reminding the recommender through the bullets of the action that you took and what the outcome was. Those are two significant and important pieces of each example. So let's just take a look at these questions. The first question really is a 50-word answer. And so it's asking the recommender to describe their interaction with you and, if applicable, your role in their organization. So if it's your current supervisor, the entire app or the entire question or prompt applies. If they're a client, then clearly you're not in their organization, but this allows them to provide the initial context of the interaction. The second question is, how does the performance of the applicant compare to that of other well-qualified individuals in the same role? And the last two questions have 500 words that are available to the recommender. It's not required that they use 500 words, but that's what's available. And so um, the important piece here is the comparison to other well-qualified individuals in the same role or in a similar role. And then they want some specific examples. So this is a great place for the recommender, to think about their own examples, but also look to the examples that you provided, maybe to jog their memory, and they'll have a different perspective of kind of how that process worked. So again, we're not asking, or I'm not suggesting that you write it for them, because perspective would be all wrong from that standpoint. But help them by providing some examples, and they may use it, they may not, but it will jog their memory and help them in this process. And then the last question is, describe the most important piece of constructive feedback you have given the applicant. Please detail the circumstances and I'm sorry, I can't read it for what's on my screen. So please describe the circumstances. So this is one where the ability to receive constructive feedback about your work. And then the key to this is not the constructive feedback that you received, but the key is the demonstrated growth from that point. What did you do differently? How did you react in the moment? How did this then benefit the company overall? So another area where they can look to your examples as a memory jogger at a minimum. Otherwise, this is where they will do the bulk of their writing. So that those are really, as I think about the recommendation, as I think about the process of um, working with your recommender, my caution is that I don't want you just to send them a link and think they're going to do it all on their own. They'll figure out what to do. You really want to guide them, and you want to think about, what are the things that I'd like for them to highlight? You can have that conversation with them. You can say, hey, one of the things that I want to make sure that comes out in my recommendation, if you're agreeable to it, is just, the extent to which I did X or demonstrated this particular skill. Um, and then they can choose to include it or not, but you should be having those kinds of conversations with your recommender. Let me go ahead and take a couple of questions. Sandra is asking, oh, what advice do you have for currently unemployed applicants since there's no current direct supervisor? That's a great question, Sandra. And a lot of people over this past year, especially, have been in that situation. And I'm working with clients who are in that situation. Um, so this is where you want to think about either a mentor or a previous supervisor. Again, the school, it's not a big red flag if you don't have the current supervisor. Um, as long as it makes sense who you're asking. Some schools may ask, why, in the optional essay, if you aren't listing your current supervisor, please explain why. Or there might be a separate question for that. Just, there's a reason why you're not doing it, and maybe your previous supervisor could, you worked with them longer, or you feel like the role that you had better ties with your goals that you're looking to achieve at coming to the MBA program. Just, a note if they require it, a note as to why. Otherwise, as long as it's one of the relationships that we talked about in that one slide, Sandra, I don't think it's going to be a big deal. Um, Eduardo is asking, is it better to have an important recommender that you know but didn't work with, or somebody you've worked with but it's not famous? Do not focus on the person's title, whether they're famous. I would much rather, this goes back to my Bill Clinton example, where when he submitted the recommendation for one of our applicants when I worked at Georgetown, um, again, I thought it was cool, and I'm telling you the story now that Bill Clinton wrote this recommendation. But the second part of the story is he didn't add any value because well, first of all, I'm sure he probably didn't write it. It was probably one of his assistants that wrote it. But I mean, I'm guessing he could have written it. But the reality is what he had to say had little content, had very little insight into what this person did in their day-to-day role. So if you know someone famous, if you're friendly with, the CEO or the CFO, um, and they can't really speak to your day-to-day work, I would go with the recommender that you've worked directly with, who can speak to your experience and the work that you've done. I want to thank you for joining today. It has been a pleasure talking with you about the letter of recommendation. It's an important part of the application process and really provides insights to the admissions committee that otherwise they wouldn't get in the application process. Um, I want to make sure that you see that we at Accepted are available to potentially work with you. Please feel free to sign up for a free consultation. This is an opportunity for you to get 30 minutes of our time. I would love to meet with you and talk to you about your application, about what you're thinking about B-School, about your profile. That 30 minutes is really meant to help you get answers to the questions you have at this point. Ideally, we would then work together, but if we don't, it's okay. Those free consultations are there available for you. Um, the one great thing I love about working at Accepted is all of the people who are working with MBA candidates have been in admissions roles. So, uh, leadership roles within the admissions process, whether it's admissions deans or other roles within the admissions team. Um, that insight of being the person who is ultimately responsible for the admission decisions, I think can be very valuable as you navigate this process. So I invite you to come to our website, sign up for a free consultation. If you'd like to email me directly, feel free. My email address is kelly.wilson@accepted.com. I'd be happy to chat with you. We also have some great free resources on the site. So I want to wish you all the best as you're working toward your upcoming upcoming application cycle. And my hope for you is that you are able to get into the school that is your dream school. And so with that, I will sign off, and I want to thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have a good rest of your day, evening, or morning. Thanks so much.